Hey there. In this live stream video, I'm going to show you a basic Hello World React application. So I've been learning React.JS, so I've been following the various different tutorials and things that are available online. One of them is the official React.JS tutorial, which is on their the React.JS homepage, and that is to create a tic-tac-toe game, which we call the noughts and crosses game in the UK. But the tutorial on their website is great. It's a really good place to start. However, I did find that while I was following that tutorial and other tutorials online, there were a few things that were a bit confusing to me at first. So in this video, I want to explain some of the very basics of React that I think may have been overlooked in some of the popular online tutorials. So that is just it's very simple stuff if you're a React developer, but this is for people that are just starting with React and don't have much experience with React currently, or maybe even with JavaScript. So yeah, let's get started. Before we begin, I'll just explain some of the requirements for this video. So the only thing we require for you to follow these steps is that you have Node.JS version 6 installed, or it will probably work with the newer version 8. I'm showing with version 6 because that's the newest long-term supported version. So you should be able to follow along with this guide if you're using a Mac, Windows, or Linux operating system. I'm going to be demonstrating on Linux. The steps will be pretty much the same if you're on Windows or Mac, except if you're on Windows, you'll be using the command prompt instead of the terminal, which you use on Linux and Mac. Okay, so make sure that you have the Node.js installed. You can install it on the website by following the steps. It's quite easy to install. There's an installer for Windows, and then I believe there's an installer for Mac. And if you're on Linux, then you probably know how to install it, but you can just follow the steps on the download page. The other thing that we require for this video is a text editor. I'm going to use Atom editor. Atom has plugins that you can install to enable JSX support, so it will properly highlight the syntax and everything for JSX. JSX is the language that's used in React. It's JavaScript, but also includes HTML and CSS, if you like, embedded in the same JavaScript page. So it helps to have Atom installed and also add the language JSX. So there's various different packages you can install to add that support. Okay, so once you have all of that set up, we can go ahead and start. So we're going to create our first React application using the Create React App tool. The Create React App tool is a tool that you can use to easily create a boilerplate project that you can then begin to build upon to build your application. So it is by far, in my opinion, the easiest way to get started with React. And the way you install it is if you're using Mac or Linux, then you may need to type sudo, but you just type sudo npm install -g for globally, and then create -react app. And if you're using Windows, you'll just drop the sudo, because sudo is a Unix thing, so that's for Mac or Linux, but the command for Windows will be the same except without sudo. So it'll just be npm install -g create react app. The -g says install it globally on the system, so it's not installing it locally in the current package, but it's installing globally. So I'm just going to hit enter there, and again I need to type my password in. Another thing to mention is that if you're using Windows, you may need to load up the command prompt window in administrator mode to complete this, because otherwise it won't have access to install packages globally. So what this is going to do is it's going to go ahead and download the Create React App npm package and all of its dependencies onto our system and install it. So the first time I ran this, it took quite a while because there's quite a lot of dependencies and it depends on the speed of your internet connection and things like that. But you can see in my example, it has gone pretty quick. So I'm going to move on to the next step, which is to use Create React App to create our project. Now, because we install Create React App globally, we should just be able to simply type create-react-app into our terminal or command prompt window, and then the name of the project that we want to create. So I'm currently at my workspace location. If you're not at your workspace location, you may want to switch before you run this command, because what this command will do is it will create a new project and all of the dependencies and everything, and set up the npm packages and everything that we require for a simple React application. We're going to call our app React Hello or Hello React, whichever you prefer. I'm using React Hello because I like to organize all of my projects with the name of the technology first. So I'm going to type create React app space React Hello and hit enter. And now this is going to go ahead and create a new React project on our system. Now, the reason I like following the steps on my local machine versus as a lot of the guides suggest using something like CodePen or things like that is because I find that it gives you a much better understanding as to how things are working and how it will actually work in a real application that you're working on. Because you're not likely to be creating applications in a real environment or for a job or anything like that using something like CodePen. Although CodePen is great for doing things like testing out, debugging, asking people questions and that. I have nothing against CodePen. But when I'm learning a new technology, I like to learn it on my local machine so I can see all the files there, see it all being used on my local machine, basically. While that's going on, I will show you the files that it is creating. So I'm going to head over to my workspace here. And you can see it's created the React Hello application or directory, I should say. And what it's doing now is just downloading all the dependencies that are required for a React application. A React, when you're getting started, one of the daunting things about it in the beginning, at least that I found, is that it's just to get a simple, basic working application is fairly complicated. It's not like jQuery where you can just simply add a link in the app to the jQuery JavaScript file. React is a little more complicated. It uses various different tools and things to run the application. So Create React App is a really useful tool for being able to create a kind of standardized project very quickly without having to do a lot of manual setup, while at the same time you can kind of, as you practice it more, you'll understand about how it's doing what it's doing and how that's operating in the background. So we're just going to wait for this Create React App to finish. This is actually what takes most of the time, longer than installing the Create React App npm package, because there's a lot of packages and things that it needs to install in the background in order to get your React app working. Once that's done, what we're going to do is we're going to create just a simple kind of hello world basic application where I'm going to show you the kind of very simple basic things that you need to understand to learn React and to build upon, so that you can follow the other guides and tutorials online and hopefully understand what's going on. So I'm kind of creating this video to fill the gap that I found there was when I started learning React. So we'll just wait a few more minutes for this to finish. While that's going on, I'm gonna open up the directory in my Atom editor. So I'm going to switch to React Hello and just type atom dot, and this should load up Atom load up Atom with my React Hello project loaded. It's still creating the application. All right, so we're still waiting for the application to create, or we're still waiting for create React app to build our application. It takes quite a while, as you can see, but there is another package manager that you can use. I've left it out of this video to keep it simple, but there's something called Yarn, which is like a replacement to NPM, and it's another package manager that people use because it does better caching and things like that of packages. So it helps speed up these kind of processes when you create new applications. Maybe in a future video, I'll show how to install and set up Yarn so that we can save this time. All this time is taken to install these applications, but it shouldn't be too much longer now, just another probably a couple of minutes. All right, so there we go. Our application has been created. Now, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to use a script that comes built in with our application that create React app creates for us that will allow us to run a development server locally so we can actually see our changes as we are making them to the application. So what you do is first you need to switch into the directory of the application we created. So that's the React hello directory. And then you type npm run start. And what this will do is it will start a development server and load up a browser pointing to our application so we can actually see our application as we make changes. And it has some cool features like it automatically refreshes the app whenever we make any changes to it. So you don't have to keep on hitting refresh. It will refresh automatically whenever you save a new change to any of the files within our project. So that's a really handy feature. All right, so you can see it's still starting the development server. This is often a lot quicker when I'm using it on my real machine. I'm using a virtual machine right now in order to demonstrate this on a kind of fresh environment. So it's taking a little longer than expected. I'd imagine if you're following along, then this would have already started, but practically within a couple of seconds if you type in npm run start. Okay, so this is the basic welcome kind of page that's created by Create React App for any new projects. So the next thing we're going to do is I'm going to explain a bit about components. So if you know anything about React already, React basically works off the principle that you create lots of different components that make up your application. So typically each component will sit in its own directory, and all of the source code for our project should be under this src directory. So you can see there's a few files in here that are created by default. These files are what allows Create React App to render this lovely welcome page for the new project. So typically what people do is the first thing they do is they just open up the app.js and they just clear this out. I'm going to leave it here for the demonstration, and you can feel free to remove this if you like at a later date. But just to explain a bit about how React works at a very kind of basic level, you have this index.js, which is kind of the entry point to the application. Typically, you won't need to change this much. Obviously, as you learn more about React and include different dependencies and things, you may change this at a later date. But when you're just getting started, I recommend not playing around too much with this stuff. What this does is it's the kind of entry point to the application, and it loads up this app component, which is the root component of our application that creates this page. So as I said, React is built up of lots of different components. These components are typically written as JavaScript files like this. You can call them app.js, or you could call this app.jsx. They're both basically result in the same thing. So what I'm going to do first is I'm not going to explain too much about this. I'm just going to start by showing you how to create your first React component. And then hopefully after I explain this, what's going on in here will make more sense. So at the src directory, if you right click that and click on new file, we're going to create a component called hello world, which is a typical kind of programming thing where you have a hello world file to start when you're learning an application. So I'm going to stick with that tradition, and we're going to create one called hello world. I'm going to call it JSX because I like to call it JSX because then the editor knows that the file is a JSX file and it knows to render it accordingly and show the syntax accordingly. Okay, so we're going to create our hello world component, hit enter, and this is going to create a blank file. Now, this is the bit where I kind of got confused with React because I was following different tutorials and I found that there are a few different ways to create a component in React, and some of the different tutorials would use these interchangeably without kind of explaining the different ways that you can create components. And then this kind of threw me off and was a bit of a hurdle for me to get over when I was following the tutorials online. So I'm going to show you the two different ways to create a React component. The first is the most simple way, and it's called the functional component. And that's what I'm going to show you here. So you start by typing import React, sorry, no quotes, React with capital R from React. And all this says is import React from the React package. And the next thing we're going to do is we're going to define a simple functional component that just says the word hello in it. So you can define a constant here and then give it the name of our component equals this open close bracket and then the arrow and then a open bracket. And what this is this is defining a functional component, a functional React component using the new ES6, or I think it was actually before ES6, but the new arrow function to create a function. So this is basically the same as typing function hello world and then return like that. So these two are basically the same, except this is the kind of new modern way to define functions in JavaScript. And I think this is what's throwing me off, because you could actually just define it like this. You could define it like this, but basically the new arrow function is a bit cleaner when you're making lots of functions in your application. So I tend to stick with this new method instead of defining functions like this when I'm working on React projects, because it's not really the modern convention to use this kind of function, then the name of the function. But once you get your head around that, it's pretty simple. All this is doing is the curve brackets means it's going to return immediately. So you could do it like, you could define it like this, or you could also define const hello world equals, and then do return in there. But you can see that it basically just provides a shortcut. If you do curly brackets or a curve bracket like this, then it just allows you to skip out on that return option. The reason I'm explaining this all is just because I found that different tutorials use different methods and it was a bit confusing, and it kind of put me off learning React at first. So the most simple way to define a component is like this. And all you would do here is you just put your HTML directly in here. So you need to have a single root element. That means you need to wrap your whole component in a single element. You can't have like a div and then another div on the same level, on the root level of your component. It will throw an error if you do that. So you have to have one single root component, and you can just write any basic HTML in here. So I'm just going to put a header called hello, and yeah, this is our component. And because we defined it in its own file, we need to, at the bottom here, type export default and then the name of the component. This just knows that when we are importing this component into our other components in React, this says what component we actually want to export from this file, so we can actually import the component from this file. All right, so now that we have created our first hello world component, let's head over to the app.js, which again, as I mentioned earlier, is the component that we're seeing here. And below inside this div, below this paragraph close here, so make sure it's above the closing div, but after this closing P, we're gonna just use our components. So we're gonna type hello world, and you need to make sure that you close off the HTML tag here. You can't leave it open like this. You need to close it off like that. And if I save that, it should re-render this, and it should show an error because of what I'll show you in a second. Here you go. So it's saying that there is hello world is not defined, and that's because we need to import our hello world component here. So just like the import statement has been used here, we type import hello world from, and then the path to the file that contains our component. So the file is here, hello world.jsx, and we want to import it from the relative directory, the same directory here. So we just type this /hello world, and you do not need to include the extension of the file. So that's why it doesn't matter if you call them JS or JSX, because you don't include the extension when you are importing the components into React. So there you go, you can see that the page auto reloaded and it displayed our hello component. So that's how you create a very basic component. Now I'm going to move on to the next topic, which is how to assign properties to the component. Now, properties is what's used to pass variables from one component to another. So like you would in HTML, you would define, you can set up certain HTML elements have different tags. Like for example, an A tag would have a href, and that's where you would define the link in the href here. So this is a property, and what you do in React is you basically take advantage of these properties to pass data from one component to another. So I'm going to just delete that a href example. And what we want to do in our test component is we want to pass a property to our hello world app that says what name we should display in our component. So if I type name equals Mark for my name, feel free to use your name or whichever name you want. And what I'm going to do is save that, and it should reload the page. And of course, nothing will happen because we haven't told it what to do with this name component yet, or this name property. So the next thing we need to do is we need to head back to our hello world component, and we need to define props as an argument to our function here. And then what you do is in React, you just in the JSX or the HTML part of our JSX, you can just simply return you can use props.name, and any code that you need to execute in the app, you need to wrap in these brackets. So anything in the HTML, you need to wrap in these curly brackets, and then it will know to execute that as JavaScript. Okay, so let's save that, and let's wait for the page to reload. All right, so now it's reloaded. I'm just going to add a emphasis around this name to make it look slightly better. Save that. And there you go. You see it's going to refresh, and it is going to hopefully show the name in italics. All right, so there. So that's how we make our component. Now, I'm just going to demonstrate how you would do this as the traditional JavaScript function, just so that it's clear. So if I was to just define function hello world, and then where this has the arguments here is props, you just put the props as the argument here, and then you just return, and in there we put our code. There you go. And I'll just comment this out and save. and it will reload, and it should show exactly the same thing once it reloads, because it's basically just two different ways of defining the same thing. The reason I'm showing you is just in case you see a guide that defines it one way and a different guide that defines it another way. Understanding that these are basically the same will help you with that. The other way to define components in React is called class-based components. Now, class-based components are what you would use to create components that have a bit more logic behind the scenes. So you can basically use the class-based components when your component is a bit more complicated than just displaying simple HTML and some properties. The way that you define a class-based component is you define a class with the name of your component, and you do extends component, open brackets, and you need to import component from React. So you do import React, comma, and then these curly brackets, component from React, and then you have your component here, and then you need to define a render, and the render will return the JavaScript, or sorry, the HTML. Save that, and I just need to comment this one out because it's giving me an error saying that there is duplicate components. You can only have one component. Actually, I copied this wrong. I need to remove this const. You only want to return the HTML within your return of the component render function. All right, save that, and it should reload. Okay, because I deleted the closing bracket there, caused an error. Okay, so now save that. Let's wait for it to reload. Props is not defined. Okay, so the difference when you're defining a class-based component and a function-based component is that with the with the function-based, you define your props as an argument to the function, whereas with the component, what you need to do to access it is you type this.props. This is used to access the base class, and then you just access .props.name and it will give you the same result. So that's basically it. That's how you create a simple component in React. And hopefully this has given you a bit of an understanding as to the different ways of creating different components in React. And hopefully this will help you understand when it comes to following the tutorials on the React official website and things like that. The next thing I'll do is I'll just quickly show you how you can assign different properties. So you can define as many properties to your component as you want. So if you wanted to split this up into maybe first name, Mark, and last name, Winterbottom, that's my last name, then you would just simply define them here, and you go into your properties, you leave properties as it is, and you can just access all of the different properties in here. So props.last name, it should show you Mark Winterbottom. So it reloads. There you go. Okay, so that's a simple hello world introduction to React. Hopefully you found this video useful. If you're new to React, hopefully this will give you a good foundation for you to build upon when you are learning and following all the different tutorials online. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you found this useful. If you're interested to get updates or anything about any future tutorials or anything that we create for free on our YouTube channel, then please subscribe. And if you have any questions at all that you would like to ask me, then please leave the questions in the comments below and I will do my best to get back to you. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.